Chapter 25, The Triple Transformation. So I'll read the last passage where we stopped, just one paragraph before. Page 892. If the psychic entity had been from the beginning unveiled and known to its ministers, not a secluded king in a screened chamber, the human evolution would have been a rapid soul outflowering, not the difficult, checkered, and disfigured development it now is. But the veil is thick, and we know not the secret light within us, the light in the hidden crypt of the heart's innermost sanctuary. Intimations rise to our surface from the psyche, but our mind does not detect their source. It takes them for its own activities because before even they come to the surface, they are clothed in mental substance. Thus, ignorant of their authority, it follows or does not follow them according to the bent or turn at the moment. If the mind obeys the urge of the vital ego, then there is little chance of the psyche at all controlling the nature or manifesting in us something of its secret spiritual stuff and native movement. Or if the mind is overconfident to act in its own smaller light, attached to its own judgment, will, and action of knowledge, then also the soul will remain veiled and quiescent and wait for the mind's further evolution. For the psychic part within is there to support the natural evolution. And the first natural evolution must be the development of body, life, and mind successively. And these must act each in its own kind or together in their ill-assorted partnership in order to grow and have experience and evolve. The soul gathers the essence of all our mental, vital, and bodily experience and assimilates it for the farther evolution of our existence and nature. But this action is occult and not obtruded on the surface. In the early material and vital stages of the evolution of being, there is indeed no consciousness of soul. There are psychic activities, but the instrumentation, the form of these activities are vital and physical, or mental when the mind is active. For even the mind, so long as it is primitive or is developed but still too external, does not recognize their deeper character. It is easy to regard ourselves as physical beings or beings of life or mental beings using life and body and to ignore the existence of the soul altogether. For the only definite idea that we have of the soul is of something that survives the death of our bodies. But what this is, we do not know. Because even if we are conscious sometimes of its presence, we are not normally conscious of its distinct reality, nor do we feel clearly its direct action in our nature. As the evolution proceeds, nature begins slowly and tentatively to manifest our occult parts. She leads us to look more and more within ourselves, or sets out to initiate more clearly recognizable intimations and formations of them on the surface. So as nature proceeds and as we evolve from the very physical to the vital to the mental life, and as nature and evolution proceeds, and in the evolutionary, as our soul becomes what they say older and more experienced, the occult parts in us manifest and they grow and they come more and more to the surface. The soul in us, the psychic principle, has already begun to take secret form. It puts forward and develops a soul personality, a distinct psychic being to represent it. So from the psychic principle, it evolves and develops to become a psychic being. So an entity, a principle, and then a being has already begun to take secret form. It puts forward and develops a soul personality, a distinct psychic being to represent it. This psychic being remains still behind the veil in our subliminal part, like the true mental, the true vital, or the true or subtle physical being within us. So, this psychic being, when it develops, it remains in the subliminal part of us, does not come forward. It's occult, subliminal, and it is one, or it is the same as a true mental. The true mental joins it, the true vital joins it, and the true physical join it. So we also have the true mental, the true vital, and the true physical. All three together, along with the psychic principle or psychic entity, constitute the psychic being. So is it very clear the difference between the psychic principle or entity and the psychic being? What is the difference? The subliminal has everything in it. But the subliminal, within it, the psychic being, when it forms, the true mental, the true vital, and the true physical are only formed with the psychic being. Otherwise, they are occult and hidden. They become the psychic being. Until then, there is only the psychic principle or entity, which is the soul principle. That is that divinity that, is not a personality. It does not begin to impact your personality or person. It remains as a principle behind. You know the difference?
It's like when the psychic being is completely, when you are governed by psychic, it has a different...
No, that is when you realize the psychic. Then you are governed by the psychic being. Even if you may have a formed psychic being, but you may not be governed completely by it. There are three things. There is the psychic entity or the psychic principle, the same. They're just two words for the same thing. The psychic entity is in every human being. It is all pervasive. But the psychic entity has an influence. It is not a formed personality. It does not have its own, it's not a being, like you say, mental being or you're a vital being. There's no psychic being. There's only a psychic principle. It's a divine spark. Yeah. So when it develops and begins to influence your outer members through its inner pressure in a stronger way, then it becomes a psychic being. So then the minds, the inner vital, and the inner physical are part of the psychic being. Explaining it in a mental language, but try and see what it means. So let me give you a practical example. Forget about all this. Have you met certain people? Let us say when you meet Nirodha, or you've met, well, none of us have met the mother, but there are people who, when you meet them, their psychic being, they have a personality, a psychic touch in their personality. They're a general being. They can't help it. They're evolved. So the psychic being becomes a formed being. You can sense it. And you say, this is an old soul, or she or he has a developed psychic being. Why would you say that? Suppose you saw, did any of you see Sunil Das, or Nirodha, or anybody else you can think of. Give me some names. Amal Kiran, yes. Developed psychic being. All of them have it. Their psychic being is developed. Why? When you come in touch with them, you sense that there is some sweetness, some goodness, something that is beyond their outer nature. It's something that is very, very strong and pushing forward. That is a psychic. Psychic spark is in everybody, but it doesn't become into a formed personality. However, there is a difference. You can have a psychic being, it can occultly influence your personality, and it is a being, but you may not have the psychic realization. Now, the psychic realization is one step beyond. That means that your outer mind and your outer vital and your outer personality is also psychicized. Then you have a totally psychicized person. That is different. That is the realization of the psychic, which is the first realization in the triple transformation, which is what we are coming to. So read on. But you've got a general sense, yes? So who have you met so far? Who? अरे तुम सारादी को मिले हो? She has developed psychic being.
Manoj Das.
And Manoj Das, the trustee, both. Yeah. Immediately you feel it. You've met him. Don't you feel it?
So they have a developed psychic being.
Okay. So, the psychic being remains still behind the veil in our subliminal part. Now we're talking about the psychic being, not the psychic principle. Like the true mental, the true vital, or the true or subtle physical being within us. But like them, it acts on the surface life by the influences and intimations it throws up upon that surface. These form part of the surface aggregate, which is the conglomerate effect of the inner influences and upsurgings, the visible formation and superstructure which we ordinarily experience and think of as ourselves. On this ignorant surface, we become dimly aware of something that can be called a soul as distinct from mind, life, or body. We feel it not only as our mental idea or vague instinct of ourselves, but as a sensible influence in our life and character and action. A certain sensitive feeling for all that is true and good and beautiful. A certain sensitive feeling for all that is true and good and beautiful. Fine and pure and noble. A response to it, a demand for it, a pressure on mind and life to accept and formulate it in our thought, feelings, conduct, character, is the most usually recognized, the most general and characteristic, though not the sole sign of this influence of the psyche. So, this is the way that the psychic being influences the outer character of the person. Of the man who has not this element in him, or does not respond at all to this urge, we say that he has no soul. For it is this influence that we can most easily recognize as a finer or even a diviner part in us, and the most powerful for the slow turning towards some aim at perfection in our nature. But this psychic influence or action does not come up to the surface quite pure, or does not remain distinct in its purity. If it did, we would be able to distinguish clearly the soul element in us and follow consciously and fully its dictates. An occult, mental and vital and subtle physical action intervenes, mixes with it, tries to use it and turn it to its own profit, dwarfs its divinity, distorts or diminishes its self-expression, even causes it to deviate and stumble, or stains it with the impurity, smallness and error of mind and life and body. After it reaches the surface, thus alloyed and diminished, it is taken hold of by the surface nature in an obscure reception and ignorant formation, and there is, or can be, by this cause, a still further deviation and mixture. A twist is given, a wrong direction is imparted, a wrong application, a wrong formation, an erroneous result of what is in itself pure stuff and action of our spiritual being. A formation of consciousness is accordingly made, which is a mixture of the psychic influence and its intimations, jumbled with mental ideas and opinions, vital desires and urges, habitual physical tendencies. There coalesce too with the obscured soul influence the ignorant though well-intentioned efforts of these external parts towards a higher direction, a mental ideation of a very mixed character, often obscure even in its idealism, sometimes even disastrously mistaken, a fervor and a passion of the emotional being, throwing up its spray and foam of feelings, sentiments, sentimentalisms, a dynamic enthusiasm of the life parts, eager responses of the physical, the thrills and excitements of nerve and body. All these influences coalesce in a composite formation, which frequently taken as the soul and its mixed and confused action for the soul stir, for a psychic development in action, or a realized inner influence. The psychic entity is itself free from all stain or mixture, but what comes up from it is not protected by that immunity. Therefore, this confusion becomes possible. Moreover, the psychic being, the soul personality in us, does not emerge full grown and luminous. It evolves, passes through a slow development and formation. Its figure of being may be at first indistinct and may afterwards remain for a long time weak and undeveloped, not impure but imperfect. For it rests its formation, its dynamic self-building, on the power of soul that has been actually and more or less successfully against the resistance of the ignorance and inconscience, put forth in the evolution upon the surface. Its appearance is the sign of a soul emergence in nature, and if that emergence is as yet small and defective, the psychic personality also will be stunted or feeble. It is too by the obscurity of our consciousness, separated from its inner reality, in imperfect communication with its own source in the depths of the being. For the road as yet ill-built, easily obstructed, the wires often cut or crowded with communications of another kind and proceeding from another origin, its power to impress what it receives upon the outer instruments is also imperfect. In its penury, it has for most things to rely on these instruments, and it forms its push to expression and action on their data, and not solely on the unerring perceptions of the psychic entity. In these conditions, it cannot prevent the true psychic light from being diminished or distorted in the mind into a mere idea or opinion, the psychic feeling in the heart into a fallible emotion or mere sentiment, the psychic will to action in the life parts into a blind vital enthusiasm or a fervid excitement. It even accepts these mistranslations for want of something better and tries to fulfill itself through them, for it is part of the work of the soul to influence mind and heart and the vital being, and turn their ideas, feelings, enthusiasms, dynamisms in the direction of what is divine and luminous. But this has to be done at first, imperfectly, slowly, and with a mixture. As the psychic personality grows stronger, it begins to increase its communion with the psychic entity. So this happens slowly and over time. It's not just that it's not imperfect, but it is not fully grown, not fully developed. But as the psychic personality or the psychic being grows and becomes stronger, it begins to increase its communion with the psychic entity behind. So the psychic being then begins to just notice the psychic personality as it grows stronger. What is the psychic personality? The inner mind, the inner vital, the inner physical around the psychic principle, the psychic entity. Now, this psychic personality, as it begins to grow stronger, it begins to increase its communion with the psychic entity behind it and improve its communications with the surface outer mind, outer body, the physical consciousness, the physical vital, the vital ego, the mental consciousness, the physical mind. So all the outer parts of the being. So the outer parts also have many, many layers within them. So it begins to have better communication with the outer personality. It begins to increase its communion with the psychic entity behind it and improve its communications with the surface. It can transmit its intimations to the mind and the heart and life with a greater purity and force, for it is more able to exercise a strong control and react against false mixtures. That is when what happens? When it grows and the psychic being becomes strong. Then this starts happening. It begins to increase communion with the psychic entity behind it and improves its communication with the surface. It can transmit its intimations to the mind and heart and life with a greater purity and force, for it is more able to exercise a strong control and react against false mixtures. Now, more and more, it makes itself distinctly felt as a power in the nature. But even so, this evolution would be slow and long if left solely to the difficult, automatic action of the evolutionary energy. It is only when man awakes to the knowledge of the soul and feels a need to bring it to the front and make it the master of his life and action that a quicker, conscious method of evolution intervenes and a psychic transformation becomes possible. So it is only by aspiration, by our wanting to live a divine life. So the second, you remember the two great steps that Sri Aurobindo, somebody asked him, what are the two great steps in my yoga? And he said, the first step is openness and surrender to the mother, to the Shakti, divine Shakti. And the second, he said, is aspiration for a divine life. So it is this, the yoga, when this aspiration to live in a deeper consciousness and in a higher consciousness and becomes a yearning, then only can this psychic transformation take place. And then instead of taking millennia, thousands and thousands of years for your psychic to come forward, it can come forward in one lifetime. But not if you do not have these two things. So, to give a definition of the subliminal consciousness is that consciousness that is unlike what is, there's a consciousness, the spiritual or the consciousness that is above, and there is a consciousness below. The consciousness below is called subconscious or inconscient, depending on the layers below. These are all layers. Consciousness above goes from higher mind to intuitive mind to illumined mind to overmind to supermind and so on. The different layers of the consciousness, and spiritual and so on and so on. I mean, there's a whole thing. The subliminal is a consciousness behind. It's the occult. And it's a consciousness that is behind. So you have this, you have that, and you have this behind. So that is a subliminal. It's the occult influences subliminal that influence us without...
Psychic entity is part of the subliminal.
So the consciousness, if you see the psychic, if you see the physical, it's behind the Anahat chakra. So it's actually behind. So it is not the subliminal.
Part of the subliminal.
No, it's not even part of the subliminal. In the sense that you could say that
the psychic being is
in
the subliminal, isn't it?
It is, the psychic being is not in the subliminal.
But he says that, no?
Not in the subliminal. You see the exact words.
The psychic being remains
still
behind the veil
In our subliminal part.
It remains there.
It remains. Psychic being, psychic being remains because the psychic being is...
Not the psychic entity.
Yes, the psychic entity is not part of the subliminal. Psychic being, because a being is formed of the inner mind, but that is only before it comes forward. So, hold on. There is a two distinction. It doesn't live in the subliminal. So when it comes forward, it's no longer in the subliminal. We haven't come to that part of the chapter.
As long as it's veiled, it's in
As
the
long as it's veiled, it's in the subliminal.
This sentence, I'm interpreting a little differently.
Okay.
That's also why that's why I want to read more. This sentence about this psychic being remains still behind the veil in our subliminal part, like the true mental, the true vital, or the true physical being. So what it is saying to me is that these four, all of them, are in the subliminal. Not that they are all one, but they are all in the subliminal.
Okay. So what I would just slightly tweak that and say that the inner mind, the inner vital, and the inner physical is in the subliminal. The psychic entity is...
Not the entity.
No, wait. No. Let me complete. The psychic entity or principle, when it begins to form a being, it forms a being around the purest part of the mind, vital and physical, which is in the subliminal. And therefore, when it begins to form the being, these three are in the subliminal. Therefore, it forms the being in the subliminal, which is the occult part of our nature, and begins to influence the outer being. And when it becomes stronger and grows, comes forward out of the subliminal.
So is there a
So it's just a psychic entity that brings it forward, not the.
Right. Because it says it rests on the soul principle, and that is what pushes it
That's
forward.
right. That's right.
But is there a difference between true mental and inner mental,
No.
or are they the same?
Same. They're just two words for the same. Letters of yoga,
One letter of Sri Aurobindo
which gives this
And
answer.
subliminal, when we say inner being, that is the subliminal. Inner being is made up of the inner mind, inner physical, inner vital, and the psychic being.
What?
Right? When we say the inner being,
The subliminal has much more than that. It's not these. You can't say it is the subliminal. You can say that
is
it
made up, the subliminal
is made up of other things also.
also what?
Now that's
But
very
I
come.
don't know, but I don't think it's made up of it.
It's not made up
It
of this. It's
contains.
everything. It contains everything.
Yeah, made up and
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, it
If you
contains.
imagine a sort of
Ocean.
nebulous state
Yeah.
of ocean in which these things are
Inside.
Yeah, they're occult things. A lot of other things are there.
So I'm saying
before
when
it
we use
leaves
the
this
term inner
space and moves
being,
forward.
does that refer to subliminal when we say the inner being? Or that refers only to these three, inner mind, inner physical,
Yes,
inner vital?
yes, it does. Only to these three.
the definition of the subliminal we have in letters. which
I think that's why I said I read more.
You read it,
I
it's
know it is
plain
in
and
A.S.
parts.
Dalal also he's taken those extracts
yeah,
and
it is there, but I'm pretty sure what I'm saying is correct because I've done summaries and summaries on Nirodha.
I also want to read.
You read, but I'm just telling you there is not the subliminal.
But also in planes and parts. Because I remember you had done summaries with Nirodha, then you made me do the summaries, so I remember that.
You know, from a mental understanding to actually touching that,
Hmm.
that is the when you really actually then understand.
Hmm. Hmm.
So there has to be a process to do it also.
Hmm.
Otherwise it all remains here.
Yeah. So you have to take it, I mean, you have to feel it. That is, we always have these occult intimations from the inner. You feel it. Sometimes you get these intimations, no? That is where it's coming from. That's why he gave those examples of the wires being cut. And you remember all these funny things, that communication getting distorted. I mean, it was really, really practical. I was amazed at the language he's used.
The whole thing which he talks about how when the mind intervenes,
Yeah.
when the vital ego,
Yeah.
all those intimations. I mean,
Yeah.
one experiences it all
Yeah.
the time.
Yeah.
These kind of things.
So it is too, by the obscurity of our consciousness, separated from its inner reality in imperfect communication with its own source in the depths of the being. For the road is as yet ill built, easily obstructed, the wires often cut or crowded with communications of another kind, and proceeding from another origin. Its power to impress what it receives upon the outer instruments is also imperfect. In its penury, it has for most things to rely on these instruments, and it forms its push to expression and action on their data and not solely on the unerring perceptions of the psychic entity. In these conditions, it cannot prevent the true psychic light from being diminished or distorted in the mind into a mere idea or opinion. So it cannot prevent the true psychic light from being diminished or distorted in the mind into a mere idea. So he uses soul and psychic interchangeably. So last few lines again. But even so, this evolution would be slow and long if left solely to the difficult, automatic action of the evolutionary energy. It is only when man awakes to the knowledge of the soul and feels a need to bring it to the front and make it the master of his life and action that a quicker conscious method of evolution intervenes and a psychic transformation becomes possible. This slow development can be aided by the mind's clear perception and insistence on something within that survives the death of the body and an effort to know its nature. So this slow development of the psychic being and the psychic personality coming to the surface, influencing the outer instrumentation, can be aided by the mind's clear perception and insistence on something within that survives the death of the body and an effort to know its nature. But at first, this knowledge is impeded by the fact. Now, do you live with this awareness that you're immortal? Do you live with this awareness there is something that will go from this body, your body, to the next, that is the being that is going to continue and will not die? Or do you live with this consciousness that you are going to die at some point or someday?
I live the consciousness I'm going to die.
I live with the consciousness that I am going to pass on from this body. Therefore, it is very important that this principle be developed in the sense that the formation of what you want to experience and achieve even in the next life should be so well formulated from day to day that should tomorrow or today or any moment your life end, that should be so strong that it doesn't matter, it will come forward. And make that will as to what you will achieve next. I mean, I'm still at that stage of thinking about the next, not finishing it here. But I think this bit is something that's very conscious. That one must be aware, one must constantly aim to seek what is it that I want to next have this inner being evolve into. That
Okay.
is
Are you aware of that in you that is immortal and conscious and will exist and continue into your next body? Now you learn to identify with that principle within, that immortal principle. That is what Sri Aurobindo is saying here. That insistence of the mind, and that the mind can help you to do. The mind is the highest instrumentation right now that we have before the psychic comes forward. So the mind can be very clear. There is something immortal in me, something very divine. Let me try and find it. Let me try and bring this forward. Let me try and recognize it. Let me listen to it. Let me find ways of listening to it. So meditation, reading, there's a ways of listening to that. Music, no? So you have to start doing that practice. Now when you start doing that, you will be doing yoga. That is what yoga is all about. Here, Sri Aurobindo is suggesting that you begin to spend time every day trying to listen and come in touch with that psychic nature in yourself, psychic entity or psychic principle or psychic being, whatever it is, in yourself, and try and listen to its intimations and keep connecting to it on a daily basis. Not because of the next life, but because of this life and now. That will accelerate it. That is what he's saying. So to be aware that when you're walking and you're doing, that even if this body falls now, you're going to still walk. You're not going to go anywhere. Who are you, firstly? Who are you identifying? So to change that identification from the outer mind and the body and the emotions and the desires and the ego to the psychic. That I am that. That is a practice that Raman Maharishi and a lot of the sages have talked about. I am that. When that becomes clear, the mind gets still, then you have this consciousness of immortality in this life. So I know preparation for the next life is one part. What about living this life with the consciousness of immortality? Okay.
What is this like? It's a occult is what? It's like an energy or what it is.
So in the etheric body, which is the subtle physical body, that's only the subtle physical consciousness. So when there is an inner body, they say there's true vital, the true physical. That is the true physical. This slow development can be aided by the mind's clear perception and insistence. Now listen to this very carefully. This slow development of the psychic coming forward and influencing the entire personality, permeating into the outer personality. This slow development can be aided by the mind's clear perception and insistence on something within that survives the death of the body, and an effort to know its nature. But at first this knowledge is impeded by the fact that there are many elements in us, many formations which present themselves as soul elements and can be mistaken for the psyche. In the early Greek and some other traditions about the afterlife, the descriptions given show very clearly that what was then mistaken for the soul was a subconscious formation, a sub-physical impression mold or shadow form of the being, or else a wraith or ghost of the personality. This ghost, which is mistakenly called the spirit, is sometimes a vital formation, reproducing the man's characteristics, his surface life mannerisms, sometimes a subtle physical prolongation of the surface form of the mind shell. At best, it is a sheath of the life personality, which still remains in the front for some time after the departure from the body. Apart from these confusions, born of an after-death contact with discarded phantasms or remnants of the sheaths of the personality, the difficulty is due to our ignorance of the subliminal parts of our nature and the form and powers of the conscious being or Purusha which preside over their action. Owing to this inexperience, we can easily mistake something of the inner mind or vital self for the psychic. For as being is one yet multiple, so also the same law prevails in ourselves and our members. The spirit, the Purusha, is one, but it adapts itself to the formations of nature. Over each grade of our being, a power of the spirit presides. We have within us, and discover when we go deep enough inwards, a mind self, a life self, a physical self. There is a being of mind, a mental Purusha, expressing something of itself on our surface, in the thoughts, perceptions, activities of our mind nature, a being of life which expresses something of itself in the impulses, feelings, sensations, desires, external life activities of our vital nature, a physical being, a being of the body, which expresses something of itself in the instincts, habits, formulated activities of our physical nature. So, what Sri Aurobindo here is saying, that we can often, because of the nature of our subliminal being very, very a lot of confusion can arise, because we also have what is called a mental Purusha, which is the Purusha, the higher principle of the mind, which is in us, and we also have the vital Purusha, which is the higher inner principle of the vital, which is in us. We also have the physical Purusha, and or the subtle physical body, which is the higher principle of the physical in us. These three Purushas can be easily confused with the psychic, because they have a subtle nature to them. They have a certain higher inner power and occult action in them. But these are not the psychic. The psychic principle or entity is what influences and permeates these three Purushas, and together they become the psychic being. But you cannot call each of these the psychic. So he says, in Greek literature, many times these sheaths, these inner sheaths of the being, have become confused with the psychic. And often after life, when the physical body dies, these sheaths continue, when especially in developed or more developed beings. In fact, some sheath continues in all of us. There could be the vital sheath, depending on your stage of development. It could be the mental sheath in the case of geniuses and Einsteins. It could be a vital mental sheath that continues. It could be something that takes on the personality, like a ghost, what you call a ghost, that continues. So that is not the psychic. So over each grade of our being, a power of the spirit presides. We have within us, and discover when we go deep enough inwards, a mind self, a life self, a physical self. There is the being of mind, a mental Purusha. There is a being of life. There is a being of the body. Yeah. So these beings or part selves of the self in us are powers of the spirit, and therefore not limited by their temporary expression. For what is thus formulated is only a fragment of its possibilities. But the expression creates a temporary mental, temporary vital or physical personality, which grows and develops even as the psychic being or soul personality grows and develops within us. Each has its own distinct nature, its influence, its action on the whole of us. But on our surface, all these influences and all this action as they come up mingle and create an aggregate surface being which is a composite, an amalgam of them all, an outer, persistent yet shifting and mobile formation for the purposes of this life and its limited experience. But this aggregate is, because of its composition, heterogeneous, compound, not a single harmonious and homogeneous whole. This is the reason why there is a constant confusion and even a conflict in our members, which our mental reason and will are moved to control and harmonize, and have often much difficulty in creating out of their confusion or conflict some kind of order and guidance, and so on. I think it'd be good to read the chapter from the beginning up to here, so that it, when you read quietly on your own, it falls into place. So I'm sure, knowing Sri Aurobindo, he will talk about all the questions that have come into our heads as we proceed forward. How each one can be separated. How does the psychic personality come forward? What are the practices that we can do? And what are the dangers, of course? Of course, the separation of Purusha and Prakriti. So we'll take this up next time.